This is Backroads of Illinois, server to farmers and ranchers in central Illinois and the Midwest on KIR in Fort Morgan, Colorado. This week's episode of the Markets Club podcast with Krstina Vannann from Vanna and Company. Grains markets and input cost like fertilizer, fuels. I am joining with Krstina Vannann from Vannann and Company. He is going to talk about the fundamentals with beans markets with China news. And we were talking about the New World's worm outbreak in Texas on the Markets Club podcast. Grains markets and input cost like fertilizer, fuels. I am joining with Krstina Vannann from Vannann and Company. Hey, Krstina, how are you today?
I am good.
Good to hear that you're doing good. Kristen, let's talk about the fundamentals trends in corn markets. What is your thoughts on the June acreage report for the corn markets?
Yeah, I think this is such a big report coming up. We know this. We know this is one of the biggest crop reports of the year. It really sets the tone. Last year, we had a lot of adjustments made to acreage after this report, but typically you do not see much movement after that. And so I just, let's ignore last year, but this year, this just really sets the tone. And I think there's so many questions you have right now when you really talk about, what do you do moving forward as far as corn acreage? Because when the surveys got sent out, originally you looked at the situation and you said, okay, the surveys got sent out, people returned them, we got those numbers in the end of March. Did they account for higher fertilizer prices due to the Iran war? And a lot of people were like, those corn acres could be overstated by a couple million acres because of the current dynamic. Now we're getting there and we're like, were fertilizer prices really that high to sway some people to switch back to beans? And I really question whether they were or weren't. But we have recently got out some estimates of some higher corn acreage, and that is definitely something we do not see because that current or do not need. Currently, we have, a carryout forecasted just under 2 billion bushel carryout, and so if we come in here and increase acreage, I think really the question is coming back and forth, like, okay, if we're going to see the corn acreage go up, does that mean bean acreage comes down? And we don't have room for bean acreage to come down, to be honest, especially if China commits to their purchases. China's been very slow to commit to their purchases. And now we're coming in here and saying, we got one larger, I shouldn't say large, decent size private sale here this morning to an unknown destination in soybeans. And if this is the start of China buying, that would be huge for this market. And we really don't have a ton of room for high exports given our crush demand has been so high. And so moving forward, what we're looking at is just saying, where is the balance between the two of them? There is a chance that you can see corn acreage come up slightly and not see bean acreage really shift all that much. We are not at a record planting for corn, beans, and wheat. So there is room to add to acreage without taking away from another one, but it's yet to be seen.
These markets is getting around at 4:21 for July corn, and the weather is turning cooling in Iowa, Illinois. How do we see some momentum in corn and beans markets?
Yeah, old crop corn is so difficult for me because we've known this for a while that there's a lot of corn around. We saw it in the fall, we saw the piles, we saw so much. basis is showing you in a lot of areas for corn that they just don't need the crop, which is opposite of bean basis in our neck of the woods. It's really starting to firm up. I just don't think there's a lot of beans left. And so when you look at corn, I really think you have to treat old crop corn separately than new crop corn. And my main focus right now on old crop corn is if you've seen basis improve over the last month because of the market sliding, I would take a chance on locking up that basis and seeing if we can get a 10 to 15 cent improvement on old crop futures and then lock those in. You do take a risk on the table of basis narrowing and you have it locked up and futures never rallying. So there is substantial risk involved in a strategy like that. So you really need to understand what you're doing. However, I'm just worried that if corn, old crop corn like July or September futures do rally back 10, 15, 20 cents, basis will widen out half of that. So you're just not getting where you need to get.
We saw the news of the New World screwworm is in down their South Texas. Are we going to have more bullish prices in the corn markets for feeds?
Yeah, I think this is like the big question here around it is what do we see happening? And I think the big question is obviously it's continuing to sprout up here in the U.S. and once it's in, I just think especially during this like heavy fly season that we're in right now, it's really hard to keep it in control. And so the big question is there a reason to keep the border closed anymore if it's in the United States? And if it does open up the border, I think that would be short-term detrimental to prices just because of being able to bring that beef back into the U.S. I know it's getting in a finished product, but just a different situation to be able to bring it in. And so that's a big question. But also, longer term ramifications would be the fact that you're coming in here and saying, hey, if we're going to have screwworm be a total issue here in the United States, that could lower beef production. And we are not able to really come in here and lower that production.
How is the fundamentals on fats on deferred contract, Kristen?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of unknowns right now for the cattle market. I think it could go in either direction, but right now, technically, looking at the charts look really good for cattle.
What is your final thoughts about the fundamentals on the corn markets?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things here as a producer, just you need to really decide, one, any old crop corn you have left, really talking about that basis situation with where you're going to deliver it to. Two, this is a big report at the end of the month. It really sets the tone for a while. So just make sure you know where your risks are. Also, if you have HTAs at the elevator that you do not need to deliver at harvest, the carries are pretty decent right now. Not as wide as we got last year, but in the big picture, side of things, a really decent basis that you might want to start looking at rolling out some of those contracts.
Thanks, Christina. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
This is Christina Vannann from Vannann and Company on the Markets Club podcast.